To whom it may concern, I forbid reading the text aloud in the course of musical performance. Any failure to observe this requirement will incur my righteous indignation against the presuming party. No special cases will be allowed. Eric Satie.
About Holothuria, vulgarly known as sea cucumber, Holothuria generally climbs on stones or pieces of rock. Like a cat, this animal purrs. It also spins a revolting kind of silk. The action of light seems to upset it. I observed an Holothuria at the Bay of San Malo. Out in the morning, it's raining. The sun is in the clouds. Very cold. Well, little purr. What a pretty rock. It's nice to be alive. Like a nightingale with a toothache. Back home in the evening, it's raining. The sun is not there anymore. As long as it never comes back, very cold. Well, mocking little purr. It was a really good rock, nice and sticky. Don't make me laugh, bit of foam. You're tickling me. I don't have any tobacco. Lucky I don't smoke.
It is with an incredible honor and privilege. I'm here with one of my dearest friends, Pedja Muzijevic. And I want to say we knew each other back in our early 20s, right? That's in last century.
And it was.
Yes, yes. And Pedja, you have always been somebody I admire beyond words that you can imagine. I adore your creativity, your intelligence, and the film we just watched, that was obviously a pandemic project. Even this time, we have all been pushed out of our own comfort zone to explore. So, besides being a world class, beautiful pianist, you also work closely with Misha Baryshnikov, and you have always produced and thought outside of the box in such an amazing way. So today we hope to start a dialogue about reimagining the stage and what that might mean. But please first tell us about your project.
Well, first of all, the feeling is mutual. We have known each other for a long time, and we've played lots of music together over the time, and it's always been a pleasure in every way. And between music, we may have cooked a bit together and shared some amazing food. And I mentioned it on purpose because all of that is connected.
Yes.
Sharing something is part of what we do. So, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and it has been really my sort of main guideline for for my whole life. Because I came to this country. I was born in Bosnia. I came to go to school, and when I finished school, I basically did any work that was offered to me. And so one of those things was a dance project. It was in 1995. It was a co-commission between Liquid Center and Netherlands Dance Theater with a director named Martha Clark. And it's through that I met Misha Bershnikov, and then we started touring together, and then I got involved in the Bershnikov Art Center. So all of that really came out of necessity, really, of me making a living and really walking through any door that opened to me. There are many other doors that I accompanied voice lessons, and I worked for Bobby Men and Joel's Mirror for Juilliard Quartet. And all of those experiences contributed to who I am. I mean, they all were amazing. And it's also that the really classic line that sounds so overused, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. I chose to find something that was amazing. You can always choose to say, oh, I'm getting only paid this little money, or this is boring, and everything is all of those things. Or you can choose to say, well, I would have never thought of that, or to be present in a studio with an amazing teacher when you are not the subject is an amazing experience because you're observing something, you're seeing what the student played, and you're seeing and hearing what the teacher says. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all that to say that all of that led to, as a sum of things, to what I do today and who I am today. So when the pandemic happened, we were all turned to filming, and I quickly decided that I did not want to recreate a concert. Mm-hmm. Because to me, that relationship between audience and performer and the composer, that triumvirate, is really sacred. And I thought, without the audience, there is no concert. Yeah. There is something else. Yes, we've all loved seeing videos, we've loved listening to LPs and CDs. This all has a place, but one is never the other. Each one has its own rules and its own world. So I having done multidisciplinary work before with dancers and kind of theatrical stagings of concerts, I had some, not so, experience, yes, also, but also some aesthetic ideas. So then I was filming, while I was offered a carte blanche to film anything. And I'd actually planned to film some music by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, which I was fairly obsessed in the last few years because it's not so known, and I thought this would be kind of an interesting story. And then I sort of changed gears because I had been fascinated by surrealism for a long time because it's such a it was such a freeing period in arts, in all arts, visual arts, poetry, performing arts. And somehow, combined with the situation where we were in, the uncertainty of the situation where we were in, I found it similarly absurd. And this is not to diminish the sufferings and the lack of income that so many people faced. But I thought, if this is not surreal, I don't know what is. So that was the first thing that led me to this idea. And then I had delved into music by Eric Satie a while ago, and then I discovered that he also wrote a lot of texts. He was also very interested in design, and he would make these kind of fake ads with different fonts and different drawings, and he was a really all-around artist. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So in that video, I actually engaged my friend Sofia Bershnikov, who is a graphic designer, to do those fonts, to kind of pay an homage to one of the fonts he was using. So the whole thing was kind of thought through with Tristan Cook, who directed it. We talked it a lot, even things like when would the credits appear? When would the title of the work appear? Before or after or during? Like all of that. And then you realize, but it's not dissimilar to concert. You have so many choices that you can make. Mm-hmm. You can make a choice. Well, okay, so you have to get on the stage, you have to play. But then you have a choice. You can stay there, you can walk away. So all of those things you can put some conscious decision on. And that became much more apparent in the film because it was a completely blank slate for us. I had never done any of that. But then you realize there were all these choices to make. How much pause is there between the words? Does it flow to each other? I left to Tristan's amazing eye and mind to deal with like angles and all of that. But still, there were so many decisions to make, and so it was a fun project. And then the Kurt Schwitter's Ursonata, which is an old spoken work in a completely nebulous invented language, I stole from a wonderful Australian percussionist, Thea Rosen, who was in my Banff residency. You know, as Igor Stravinsky famously said, bad composers borrow and good composers steal. I pick up everything from anybody, and anything I do is available to be picked up by somebody else. We all live in continuum. So, and then the George Antile pieces are these tiny, tiny little vignettes inspired by Max Ernst's graphic novel. So it's all very multidisciplinary in its origin of the music. And so it seemed to kind of make sense to make a little film about it.
Wow, that was incredibly eloquent. But a few things that as you were talking, I thought complete artists use that word, and that is exactly how I would describe you. I no, I think when one is deeply immersed in one discipline, quickly you feel the connections to other disciplines, and so that love with the dancer, with the visual, and with throughout your project, what I have found so touching is that flow of music was really central to it all, and that's all. I feel as if only a musician could really produce something like this because the visual aspects could really inform
Right.
the expression of the music rather than the other way around. And we have come from a world where mostly music is to support
Right.
something else, whereas when it's a visual component that's actually supporting the music, it really feels different. It's a very different experience. And actually, speaking of that, we come back to food and eating and experiences, the idea of creating an experience, and the idea that we belong in that when we walk on stage, right? And so when you talk about the audience being a critical part of it, it's something I address a lot with my students, because inevitably as they grow, there is always a time when people are dealing with nerves and subconscious nerves or not knowing, and almost always I feel as if we need to frame it around how there is this absolute need to be with each other and giving somebody a gift, but that experience is not complete if there was no receiving end. We could all practice in our practice room, and then it's still kind of not as meaningful. So, but okay. So another aspect of sharing that I have always found fascinating, like you, I too did everything I could to make a living when I was growing up. I came to this country. I didn't have a viola. I mean, I just didn't for years and years. And so now when people ask, "Oh, how did you end up doing this?" My first thought was always, "Gosh, I'm the luckiest person because I'm an accidental violist." That's what it feels like. And accidentally we meet, and here we are. 20, 30 years later, also as an immigrant, now that I have kids and they're older, and having lived with them and raised them in a really a completely foreign culture, of course, which I've grown to be to a sense of belonging now. I'm still very aware of that interesting dialogue inside. So, and I think that in fact informs all of our decisions all the time. The decision making that happens every moment. How has that impacted you, or are you even conscious of it or not?
Well, I was just going to say, so much of our identity DNA is unconscious or subconscious. But it's definitely there. There's no doubt that it has to be there. And there's that also fine line, you are a parent, of how much are we predestined to our life path from the moment we are born, and how much one can manipulate that? And I think the answer is yes to both. I think there is a sense of that who we are. I mean, we've all, met little kids, including yours, who are people immediately, who have personalities and who are different. And that goes in that direction. But yes, they're also, there are intersections, and you take this road or that road. But what's interesting to me is that, especially given the endless wars that happen on planet in other places, currently in Ukraine, is how can we celebrate who we are and where we came from without being threatened by someone else? And this is obviously has been a question for the millennia. And I think it translates in every uh, section of life. It can be between a string quartet and an orchestra player, or a soloist and in a piano trio. It's there in every aspect. And how can we just see this as a plus and not as a minus? And it's not an easy thing. I'm sure I fault also in those. With some of it is just discomfort, some of it is fear, some of it is anxiety, some of it is competitiveness, some of it is like, well, what about me? Which brings me back to say something that what you were saying earlier about concerts and audiences and all that. I think it's shamefully maybe not so long ago. I mean, 10 years. So I'm old, so and maybe even longer. But it's interesting. I started to really think in everything I do, what's in it for the other side? What if you play a concert? What's in it for the audience? And this really led. I arrived at this because of the residency I directed at BAM Center in Canada, which is called Concert in 21st Century, which I designed myself because I was so curious both about concert as a format, but also about how can we be more relevant today. Because I think we tend to always blame the other side, the funding, the journalists, the television. We don't get the attention, but we don't ask ourselves, well, why did they drop that? Why did they stop writing about that? Maybe we can change something. So I started really being very critical without being negative about it, but just really observing what is it we do and what can we change without making a circus out of it that would make more sense for somebody who's that mystical and mythical 37-year-old attorney who has never bought a ticket for a concert. And that led me to really constantly ask myself, what is in it for the other side? And what is in it for the ticket buyer? If I pitch a program for the presenter, why should that presenter buy this program or book this program? What's in it for him or her? And I think that's such an important dialogue that so we don't only just dream of things we want to do. Well, that's all lovely, but if it's spoiled. So like we have to ask ourselves, well, why would that make sense for somebody else? And it's not going to be a life-changing experience. Sadly, we don't cure cancer. But it can be something that's relevant at the moment or relevant for a certain community or for a certain hall or for a certain year or whatever it may be. But I think it's so important to ask oneself. And that also somehow goes with the identity. I came from a small country whose language nobody speaks and whose names nobody can pronounce. So I think
how do you pronounce it?
Just as you did, Pedja Muzijevic, you did perfectly fine. But anyway, so that is, I think that actually is connected to where I was born, because we're not a superpower, and I think there's a different approach and different starting point where nobody understands you. You always have to speak another language for somebody to understand you. Yugoslavia, which is one country when I was born, there were many, many tourists on the coastline. They were Germans, they were Italians, they were French, they were Russians, they were Czechs. So I was used to being surrounded by foreign languages. We always watch television in foreign languages. So I think all of that has certain, it seeps in your identity. So, but it's really, but it's, it's also why we are so fortunate to have traveled so much and to have lived in other countries and to have been open to that. And this is where arts really play such a huge role. And this is really why we need the arts. Because I think we are able, because we are constantly exposed to a different musical language. And so we have learned to be comfortable in most of them. Maybe not all of them, and that's okay. But we've all learned that it's not going to be forever. You do a piece and then you do something else. So it's the same with being in another country or a city where you're not comfortable, or the food that you don't know what to order. A, you're willing to take a risk, and then B, you feel like, well, I'm leaving in 4 days.
Yes.
So I think arts really help with all that,
Yes.
with this identity thing.
Well, that's so beautiful. And going back to thinking a little bit about that sense of whether we see differences or unity. I find that to be when I think about what we do that makes us better is chamber music.
Of
Right?
course.
Chamber music, it's the ultimate life tool.
Right.
You learn to be with others, you learn to find a common vision musically, and you learn to not say you're too loud, I'm too soft, or you don't say these things because that doesn't help anybody. But if you say we bring the listening around harmony,
Right.
and then we find unity, we find sameness rather than.
But also because
Yeah.
chamber music is a perfect balance or dialogue between identity, individuality,
Yeah.
and unity. Because
Exactly.
it's not just uniform.
Right, of course
And
not.
that's the beauty of it.
Right.
And interestingly, I was once invited to speak to a leadership course at the University of Alberta because of chamber music. And at
Yeah.
first, I said to this wonderful woman who was an amateur violinist, I know her through an amateur chamber music seminar, and I said to her, what on earth would I speak to a leadership course? And I said to her, and she said to me, I want you to speak about chamber music. And so I spoke about leading and following,
Yeah.
how there is no following without leading.
Right.
It's all, it seems that somebody gives a cue, but everybody, if everybody else doesn't participate,
Exactly.
it's dead on arrival.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that balance
Exactly.
between, individuality and unity, which is constantly playing.
Yeah. And I always say to my students, give a cue but then follow. Give a cue but follow.
Right.
You can't, and if we're not together, both at fault. It's not just one person.
And the cue is really taking somebody's hand.
Yeah, that's right. Or watching the eyes, watching the eyebrow. Yeah, no, but that's.
Well, it's so interesting, as
absolutely.
I'm sure you've noticed when we had to play with masks, how much you realize how cue comes from the whole face.
And the
It was
listening,
so difficult,
right? And
yeah.
the listen, there's because these silences. This is a lot of the listening comes, and so all of a sudden I find I couldn't hear.
I'm a
My
pianist,
students
I don't
was.
listen.
No, it's okay. I know we can talk for hours because you are so knowledgeable and well-rounded and hilarious. Lastly, so for young musicians who are just graduating from school, and as we talked about earlier, it is a terrifying time because I think the conservatory training focuses in on the craft, but then once in a while, of course, the mind gets we can dig a hole for ourselves, and it's hard to look outside. What are some of the things that you would?
Well, first of all, I think that is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is necessary, just like protecting children not to know every calamity of the world when they're growing up. They don't need to. They'll find out later.
Yeah.
So it's the same with conservatory training, that you have to hone your craft. You have to learn your craft, because with your craft, none of this is relevant.
Exactly.
If you cannot play, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So all that to say, never regret any time, because everything contributes to something.
Yes.
So that's the first part, including like every gig, every jingle or Broadway gig you get. Don't regret it. Don't spend all the money.
Yeah.
But also, if you position yourself that way, you will learn something from everything.
Yeah.
First thing that I would say is, and I know you know as well, is that it's not only playing. When you get a gig, it's everything around your behavior that will determine whether people want to be with you. Playing is only one aspect. How you responded to emails, whether you sent that photograph that I asked you for, all of it mattered. Did you clean the cottage where you stayed? And it sounds frivolous, but it is not. Life is a sum of all those parts. And I would even go as far as to say that that also reflects on the stage, but it's just sometimes it's covered by well-trained people and all that. It's all packaged. But it's immensely important. Think about others. Think about who is following you. And, let's say you are in a mixed bag program. Don't only think about yourself. Oh, I need that, and I need a box for my cello, and I need. Think about that there are 7 other performers, and just say, well, what makes sense for others, So I think that's really, really important. And then the other thing that I already said, walk through every door that opens. Because all doors work both ways. Some may cost you to get out, but they all work both ways.
Yes.
What else?
And if the door doesn't work, there's a window.
Yes. Just be careful.
Don't jump.
The other thing that I think is really immensely important is that never stop being an audience member. You will learn so much being in an audience, and you will learn and ask yourself, once you go that past, I'm there because it's my best friend play. If you chose to hear a concert, go to a dance performance, go to an art show, why did you decide that? What is it one thing that made you look up and say, I want to be part of that? Yeah, sometimes it's only the celebrity name, but sometimes it's not. So ask yourself and see how can you incorporate that in your pitches, in your creative thinking, that it's somebody else who might say, I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
So that I think is immensely important to be. And then the other thing is, these days there's so many, which I think is so much better than our time. People are much more willing to organize a little concert, to go into a space, take initiative, and ask people in a polite and respectful way. Maybe it's a gallery of your aunt or your aunt's cousin or whatever, and maybe you can just sort of say, well, I have these 4 friends, we could maybe do a little. But again, think what would make sense for them. Let's say they're a gallery. Well, maybe all 6 Bartok quartets are not the thing that they're really longing to do.
Yes.
Maybe you have, your I don't know, your uncle is an attorney and they have an event and they want some live music. Again, ask yourself, what would make sense for them? Will they be standing? Will they be sitting? If they're standing, maybe you don't need to play more than 20 minutes because they'll get fidgety. So look around and see what you want to do, where it is. It's not always the same situation as the concert hall. And I think that's immensely important because these days, I think these are markets that are actually opening, and it's immensely important that we walk through the door and leave a good impression that will make these people say, again, I want another concert. Because our market, there's so many more great musicians. And it's not, there's this narrative for so long, music is dying, music is dead, it's so boring. No, there's just so many more musicians.
Yes.
And even the opportunities are more, but not equally. It does not follow it.
Right.
And so I think anything any of us can do to open another market that would embrace us and embrace what we do is a win-win for all of us.
So one of the books I wanted to talk with you about was the Noah House book, the art piano playing. And one of the chapters he asks, what is talent? And of course, that's a loaded question, right? Because in fact, nowadays, you can say somebody who wins these international competitions, they're talented. You can say people like you who does 20,000 jobs, you're talented. But what is talent? And in the book, in the end, he simplifies so beautifully. He said it's actually just the passion of sticking to that. It's just sticking passionate about what you do, and that's so meaningful and beautiful because we can be passionate about so many different things. Of course, we're different values. People can choose to just do the Beethoven sonatas.
Right.
People can choose to just do Eric Satie.
And I think it's fun. Both are fun, but you have to know that. And the passion is the right word. And it's interesting. I forgot. I haven't read that book in decades. But it's interesting because I think we're in such, and you know that more than anybody, being that you're in school and facing these people. Yeah. Now it's such an interesting situation. The training is so good that it can mask the lack of passion, that is a huge issue. And I think that actually you may cut this in if you want to. But one thing that I would say for any young musician, that at any given moment you should ask yourself, do I live for this?
Exactly.
Is my life going to be meaningless if I don't do this? And that's really the only reason to do this. Never forgetting that you can always keep playing if you go into another career. Because now amateur playing is actually higher than ever. It's actually blossomed like in 19th century, which is wonderful. And you can contribute by buying tickets. We need more ticket buyers than musicians at this point. So don't just follow blindly because you went through the school and that's what is expected of you. Ask yourself at all times, is this really my passion? And it's okay.
That's right.
Because you have received this amazing training of discipline and high criteria and individuality that in many other majors you would not face.
That's right.
You can most likely very quickly pivot to something else. So passion is the most important thing about
And passion is the thing no one can give you.
Correct.
No one can give you that. People give you money, they give you love, they
And
give
it's
you
been
knowledge.
a huge. We've all seen people who played incredibly gone and realize, and even they themselves, like I'm 27, I actually realize I don't care about this, which is so devastating.
Yeah. It's so true. Pedja, you're a miracle. You're a gift to life. You really no. It's not. To say you wear many hats is actually an understatement. It's like it's an embarrassment. It's an insult because it's more. You don't even wear hats. You're